Thank you for joining us in the Seattle Hub for this online version of Geeky Pedagogy. And I know that you're doing this sort of on your own and you may be in a partner, but what I would like for you to do is we go through today's lesson. I want you to be intentional with how you answer the questions I'll give you. Some of them are really challenging and will require some thought. And I want you to take those thoughts and write them down and post them into the discussion board associated with this specific workshop, and share with us your responses so that we can see how you're thinking on some of these things. So I don't mean to frighten you, but you'll have to do some actual work. There you go. That's the old Pac-Man tune that you guys have maybe heard in a past life somewhere along the way, and Pac-Man mania and everything that swept across the world in the early 80s. How fun was all of that? And I thought there's no better way to start Geeky Pedagogy than with a little bit of Pac-Man. And to do that, what I want to do is just hop right into what Geeky Pedagogy, who it is and who wrote it. And it's by a professor. I believe she teaches up in New England, and she said that just because you know a lot about something doesn't mean you know how to teach it. So if we just think about the context of this quote, I think it's very powerful, because we can be experts in a variety of things, but that doesn't make us an expert teacher of that thing. I'm an expert hamburger eater, but I don't necessarily know some of the tips and tricks to make the most succulent, delicious burger you've ever had in your life. And if you're vegetarian, I'm sorry for using that particular language. But there are things, around us that we may not be good at being able to teach. And some of those things that we may not be able to be good to teach at are some of those things that we're really geeky or nerdy about. So Jessamyn Neuhaus has written this book called Geeky Pedagogy, a guide for intellectuals, introverts, and nerds who want to be effective teachers. And it's published by the West Virginia Press. Now, let's look at some definitions. According to dictionary.com, a geek is a person who has an excessive enthusiasm for or some expertise about a specialized subject or activity. You are a geek with the material that you love to teach. And so I want you to take a second. I want you to think about your favorite things to teach, and I want you to write them down. They're the things that you're going to be super geeky about. And then when you're ready, push play, and we'll define nerd. So again, according to dictionary.com, a nerd is an intelligent but single-minded person obsessed with a non-social hobby or pursuit. You could probably chalk nerdy into academia. But let's talk about a couple of things. What are you geeky about? I'm really geeky about teaching specifically trigonometric identities in pre-calculus class, or an advanced algebra trig class. That's one of my most favorite things to do. I am also super passionate and geeky about what good pedagogy looks like as far as from a teaching standpoint. Like, how can we make sure that what we're doing as teachers truly has an impact on what our students are learning and how they're learning. Like, I get all geeky about that kind of stuff. On the nerd side, I'm all about a good Star Wars movie or Lord of the Rings or something like that. Like, my inner nerd starts to come out. Read the books, watch the movies, all the cool things. So take a minute and just think about what are your geeky, nerdy things. And we're going to use these as sort of a reflective piece. And I want you to refer back to this as we go through our lesson today. Nothing says geeky pedagogy better than some fun, geeky, nerdy memes that have been found all through pop culture and all the different things that go on there. So here's one of Grumpy Cat. I had fun once. It was awful. And they're in there, some memes, some fun ones. But let's talk about what you're going to learn today and sort of put you in a mindset of where we're going to go. Number one, we're going to release your inner nerd. We're going to add some inner geek, and we're going to bring your students along for the ride. Remember, the goal here is to try to take this course, this curriculum, this learning that you have so much passion for, and get your students to come along for the ride. And remember, some of those students don't want to be in your class. They're having to take it because it satisfies a general ed need, or all the other classes were full at that time and they needed to get this sort of thing. So they don't have that same passion that you do. So how can we utilize our strengths, our geekiness, our nerdiness as it relates to our curricular area or this course that we're teaching, and get those kids? We don't have to hook them, but we've got to make sure that by the end of the semester they've met those learning outcomes that we want them to meet. And on every slide, have a giggle, I've provided an appropriate quote. So this one is from Big Bang Theory, and it's Penny to Raj's dog. Bark once if you need me to call PETA. All right, how are we going to do this? We're going to split our conversation up today into 5 different areas. 1, awareness. That will be where we start. And then we're going to talk about preparation. Then we're going to look at reflection. We're going to look at support. And finally, we'll end with practice. And these are all the critical areas that Geeky Pedagogy talks about. In her book is separated into these 5 things. So what we're going to do is we're going to talk about each one of these areas. I'll provide a quote on a slide that goes with that area, and then I'll break it out into the subheadings of her book so that you can sort of see how her book lays out, and then all of that will come together to resemble Geeky Pedagogy. So logic is the beginning of wisdom, not the end, according to Mr. Spock. Awareness is where we're going to start. And if you're familiar with the Harry Potter movies, our good friend Ron Weasley was sort of a dour guy, not prone to be overly happy, sort of had the cloudy, rainy point of view of life. And Professor McGonagall noted one time, "Take Weasley with you. He looks far too happy over there." So she was aware of Ron Weasley. And we need to be aware of our students, and we also need to be aware of us. So this chapter was broken down into understanding identity. It's really, really important. Your student's identity, your identity, and how these things go together. Also, learning is hard. Think about the journey that you've gone on and the times that you've learned the most, or those times that you've learned the most is when the learning was really difficult for you. I would argue with you that the learning was difficult for you. We need to know our students, and we need to know ourselves. These are really, really key pieces of being aware of what's going on in our classroom. So there's a quote here that sort of supports all of this that's from the book, and I wanted to share space throughout here, different quotes. I know that you can read this, but I also want to read it to you so you can hear my tone of voice and inflection and sort of understand how I interpret this. But Geeky Pedagogy says on page 24, our race, gender expression, age, ethnicity, economic class, physical appearance and abilities, sexual orientation, and speaking voice all affect how students perceive us, how they accept our authority, our expertise, and how they respond to different pedagogical approaches we might implement. There's a lot going on in here, but we've got to understand these things. Just recently in my own house, my son had a horribly tragic day, and his mind just was not right. He had some things happen to inside his little personal social bubble that were just really frustrating for him and caused a lot of emotion. And then he had to go with all that emotion percolating to a band ensemble performance where he was distracted by these things that had happened, and so he wasn't able to focus on his music, so he got called out by the teacher, and his reaction at that time was an eye roll, and then the teacher then proceeded to really give him the what-fors for an extended period of time. So, he's working with a new teacher. That new teacher doesn't know him the way that his regular teachers do. So that new teacher handled the situation a little bit differently than maybe somebody that knew him better, that would know that he doesn't typically fall into some of these sort of typical mistakes. And so I say that not to have you feel bad for my son, but hey, you're going to have students walk in to your classroom that are going to have experiences of being othered. They're going to have experiences of having a sexual orientation that is different from their peers. They're going to have an ethnicity that is different from their peers. They're going to be a different socioeconomic class. They're going to have all these things happening to them that we may or may not be aware of. But we need to try and figure out ways as teachers to get to know our students and know their identity so that we can help them to reach the learning outcomes that we have for our class. They aren't the teachers. They don't have that point of view that we have, the experience that we have, and the knowledge that we have about teaching. So we have to do our best to make sure that we know who our students are, so that when we do these different things for pedagogical reasons, our students will go with us. Now, let's take a minute and talk about The Martian. I could be wrong here, but it's my understanding that The Martian, written by Andy Weir, was written in a way that had a lot of science in it. And so he researched the science and included it in his book, but then he took his finished manuscript and he sent it to rocket scientist people who study Mars and are familiar with all these different things that have to happen for humans to travel to Mars and live there successfully. And then they made corrections to his science and sent it back, and boom, you have the book and a very popular movie from this. And so learning is hard, and that is geeky what he did. But he took the time to learn how all these things happened, and now you've got a book that in theory could really happen. Now, I don't know if real life looks like it does in the book, but in this case, in theory it could. So what does that mean? Well, it ties in this way. Sitting and listening is not an effective way to learn. And if you poll your students and you ask them who their best teachers were, a lot of those students are going to tell you that some of their favorite teachers and some of their best learning happened in classes where the instructor was an excellent storyteller, full of humor, gripping voice, able to really engage the students in a lecture. But a lot of the scholarship of teaching and learning has shown that lectures are the least effective way for students to learn. And so students automatically associate a good lecture with good learning. But if you were to go back and ask a student over a specific lecture 2 weeks later, they're going to have a very difficult time trying to recall that information. So what type of learning activities can we do to complement our lectures or to complement the learning so that students in 2 weeks can recall that information that they need? Remember, the goal here is to get students to reach those specific learning outcomes for your course. So any type of learning must be built on previous knowledge. Anytime that we can engage our students in a way that requires them to build on foundations they already have constructed, then that's going to help them in the long run move towards those specific learning outcomes. Learning requires repeated practice over extended time. This is also backed up in all kinds of research, that the more frequently we can engage in something, for the longer period of time that we can engage in that thing, learning will occur. Productive struggle is important. So if you've worked on some sort of capstone or dissertation or master's thesis or an MFA or anything that required like a lot of learning and a culminating project, at some point in time there was a struggle in there. And I would argue with you, if you truly think about it, those times that you learned the most were those times that you had to struggle to put all the pieces together in a way that made sense and can demonstrate that thing that you were working on. And emotions matter. Emotions are super important, and they play a big role in the learning process. And we have to recognize that. So, for example, going back to my son, he was an emotional wreck on this day for band, and it impacted his playing. So that makes a difference, because it's going to be hard for him to learn when he's in a situation like that. So just being aware. Now, here's what I want you to do. We're going to look at some questions here, and I want you to take the time to really consider these and then write out your answers so that you can share them with us on our D2L discussion board. Question number 1, what can you do to be more aware of student identity? Question number 2, what is the first impression that your students have of you, and is that impression who you are? And question number 3, we have repeatedly experienced the rewards of academic success. How does this impact our teaching? Remember, you're teaching here at this university because along the way, for the most part, you have genuinely enjoyed the process of learning. How are you going to interact with those students that don't feel that exact same way? Catch this quote from Gandalf: "It's a dangerous business walking out one's front door." And I want you to think on that quote as you consider these questions. Pause the video right here and then pick us up again in just a minute after you've had time to reflect. All right. Now that we've talked about awareness, let's move into the next part of the book, which is preparation. Do or do not. There is no try. Yoda was right on when he was talking about that, because as teachers, we either are going to or we're not going to. There's not really a try in between if we really think about the teaching process. And so what Geeky Pedagogy talks about are these things. One, put on your professor pants. I'm going to give you a quote that aligns with this in just a second. Two, prepare your syllabus. Now, I know in some of our departments in schools, the syllabus is pretty tight and there's not a lot of leeway in there for any adjustments to happen. But I would also press on that just a little bit and encourage you to put yourself into that syllabus as much as you can. If you can make your syllabus visually appealing, including pictures, including memes, including different things that support what it is that you're trying to work on, I think that's very valid. You want to reveal as much of yourself as you can to your students. And while you're examining your syllabus, also consider how your syllabus is written. Is it written towards the student? Is it free of as much jargon as it can be free of? Yes, yes, yes. Jargon is important, especially in some of those courses where jargon is what the course is about. But in your syllabus, think about a student who is unfamiliar with that jargon and they're reading this thing for the first time. It doesn't help them to look at that syllabus and get lost with all these phrases they don't understand. So as jargon-free as possible, consider making those changes. Prepare for the first and last day of class, and I think this is an area where I could argue with you that I bet you prepare a lot for the first day, but do you prepare for the last day? How can you wrap up that season of learning with your students? How intentional can you be? And Geeky Pedagogy challenged me here. This was a tough challenge for me because I don't very often think of the last day. I spend a ton of time on that first day, but I don't spend very much time on the last one. Prepare for every class meeting. Every class meeting is important. Every single one. We know that. We have limited time. We have all these things that we want to teach our students. But sometimes we don't do a very good job of communicating to our students that every class period matters and it's there for a reason. So how can we prepare those class meetings to communicate that to students? And finally, prepare for conflicts and confrontations. You're going to have them. I never even really considered preparing for conflicts and confrontations until I had this course. I've taught classes in the past and I've done stuff where I'm like, well, a confrontation is coming, a conflict is occurring, but I didn't prepare for dealing with those things. I reacted to the situation I was in, and there are several times when I look back, if I would have prepared ahead of time, I could have reacted better because I would have had a plan to follow instead of just stumble through potentially volatile situation. Because when you start talking about students and grades and things like that, sometimes the gloves come off quickly. So how can we prepare for situations where these things are going to occur? Now, this is one of my favorite quotes out of all the different quotes that I've given you today. And this is from one of the Doctor Who's. Now, if you're not familiar with Doctor Who, they regenerate over time. And I think we're on like 17 Doctors or something like that now. Who knows? But this is from one of the Doctor Who's. There's something that doesn't make sense. Let's go poke it with a stick. I live in that world. Let's just challenge stuff. Let's poke it and see what happens. But here we come back to the Professor Pants phrase. And this is what Geeky Pedagogy had to say by that. By Professor Pants, I mean consciously and deliberately preparing to clearly communicate and to clearly convey to the best of our unique ability and our unique teaching context that we are ready, willing, and able to teach students how to successfully do things. Consider this whole statement. A lot of times as we get into our ruts and we get into our habits and we get into our, this is how I've done it, this, or we're looking forward to spring break, or we're looking forward to fall break or Thanksgiving, or we're looking forward to summer, or we're looking forward to winter break. All these things happen and we fall into ruts and we fall into habits and we fall into paths that maybe we are trying to avoid. And when I look at this, I'm reminded that we have to intentionally think, how do we move our students to reach those learning outcomes that we want our students to meet? That's the goal of the class. And I mean, I've done it just as much as the next person, where I'm looking at what I have to teach today. I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to get through page 79 by the end of class today, or whew, we're not going to make all the material by the end of the semester. Remember, the material is important, yes, But the purpose of the class that you're teaching is to have the student successfully do some sort of thing, whatever that thing might look like. So you've got to get your students to move towards those learning outcomes. That's the thing that we're trying to get them to reach. So are we able and willing to help our students successfully do that? And if so, we need to fully step into and embrace that mindset. All right, here's our next set of questions. And they're going to all fall under Edna Krabappel's quote. If you don't learn Roman numerals, you will never know when movies were copyrighted. So just chew on that for a minute. And then think on these things. Answer the following question. What do you want students in this class to learn how to do? I mean, really think on this. What is it that you need your students to successfully complete, learn, do for this course? Then, after you've written that down, develop in one jargon-free sentence why they should learn to do this. Okay, those two things go together. Next question. What can you do to make sure that each class meeting is viewed as a serious intellectual endeavor by students? And lastly, how can you prepare for confrontation? So think on these questions for a few minutes. Go ahead and pause the video and we'll catch you in a minute with another meme. Hey, Ryan Gosling here. Hey girl, you must be 0.5, it was P greater than 0.05 because I failed to reject you. Now, if you're watching this and you're a quantitative researcher, you have the giggles. And if you're looking at this and you're a qualitative researcher, you're like, hey, what the heck is going on? There's a math joke in here. It's nerdy, it's geeky, it's funny. All right, moving on to reflection. When I was working on my professional education degree, my faculty kept telling me I needed to be able to reflect. I needed to be able to reflect. I needed to be able to reflect. It was really difficult for me to understand what that meant. So they were telling me to reflect all the time, but I didn't get it until I started teaching. And about 2 weeks into my first teaching assignment, I was like, holy smokes, I need to really think about what I'm doing here. And I started reflecting on those first few lessons and trying to update my next 2 lessons to try and learn from my teaching experiences. So, reflection. How can we do that? Well, one of the things that we can do that can help us with reflection is to engage our students in an evaluation of our teaching. Now, this doesn't mean that it needs to be an end of course 30 question eval done once a semester. That's very helpful, very important to get that information. But that doesn't help you correct your teaching in the middle of that semester for those particular students. So my challenge to you is think of 4 or 5 or maybe even 6 different opportunities where you can get a quick evaluation of your teaching by your students. What's working great? What isn't working great? What can you improve on? What are you doing well? What would you what would your students like to see you try? But check in with them constantly on that. They'll be open the more you do it, and if you start incorporating some of those changes, then that will help them as well. Because remember, the goal here is not necessarily your comfort with your stuff. You're already geeky nerdy about it. But the goal here is to make sure your students reach those learning outcomes. The other thing that we need to reflect on is the student perceptions of teaching. See, we teach. We're good at that. We've trained for that. We work at a university to do that. Like, this is who we are, what we do. Students don't have that same experience. So when we have an activity that goes on in class, they might be rolling their eyes thinking, why in the world are we doing this activity? How is this going to help me do the thing? They don't have the background of the pedagogy that you've got. They don't have the experiences that you have as a teacher. They're just looking at it from the student side like, uh-oh, I got to do this thing. So how can we alter that perception of teaching so that students know that there's a purpose for that thing? And then finally, be reflective on your pedagogical practices. Ask yourself, why are you doing what you're doing? Is this really helping your students meet the learning activities or meeting the learning outcomes that you want them to meet? I mean, when I was in elementary school, I remember my first grade teacher, she always had when she gave us a worksheet, it would be on one of those ditto machines with purple ink that was smelly, and a lot of times that paper was kind of wet, and so I couldn't write on it very well with my pencil. And then one day she came in and gave us a Xeroxed sheet, and it was warm, and my pencil could write on it really, really easy. So what happened? Nothing happened. I went from one worksheet to another. But if you walk into your classes today and you have that purple ditto sheet for your students to fill out, they would arch an eyebrow at you because they don't live in that world. So we need to be reflective on the pedagogical practices that we're using, and we need to consider why we're doing what we're doing, and maybe there are some updates or some changes or some tweaks that we need to make. But unless we think on what we're doing and why we're doing it and where we're moving our students to, it'll be hard for us to make those changes. So again, from the X-Files, I think this quote is excellent. Nothing happens in contradiction to nature, only in contradiction to what we know of it. And so sometimes we're going to come across things that truly are going to shake our foundations, and then we have to think, all right, what changes from here? So chew on this one from Geeky Pedagogy then. Virtually every college teacher in virtually every teaching context should solicit student feedback in a variety of ways throughout the semester, particularly the midterm. And don't forget to ask about what is going right in the course and what is working well. And she even goes on to say in other parts of her book, like, really think about asking frequently with your students to give you an evaluation. Walt Disney said, when you're curious, you find lots of interesting things to do. So that's my challenge to you. In what ways can you seek actionable feedback on your teaching? And in what are some specific, achievable, reflective goals that you can set for yourself? Think on these things, write them down so that you can share them with us in our discussion board. Pause the video, and when you're ready, we'll come back with another meme. From everybody's favorite non-plot movie, here's Kip with his famous yes. And if you haven't seen Napoleon Dynamite, I encourage you to just give it a whirl some Friday night. You may or may not like it, but it's got some clever funniness in it. All right, let's talk about support. This is the next stop on our journey through Geeky Pedagogy. And the thing with support is we all need it at some point in time to improve, to get better, and to learn new things. So what does that look like? Well, it looks like a variety of different things. But for example, one place you could utilize for support is right here at CETL, here at Oklahoma City University. We want to be able to do the dirty work of reading through the scholarship so that we can help you do things a little bit differently that can improve your practice. Because the pedagogy and the scholarship of teaching and learning and the practice of teaching is constantly in a state of change. Okay, I mean, I was just talking about the ditto sheet that my first grade teacher gave me way back when. That's not going to work now. So what changed? Everything. So we have to be prepared to continually adapt our teaching style and learn from the research and the scholarship that is being developed. Please come visit us. We have Scholarship of Teaching and Learning publications. We can share with you conferences you might consider. Yeah, it's important to go to whatever that conference is for the curricular area that you study in. But every now and then, consider going to something on teaching and learning. It will really be great for you to get in there and learn with other like-minded individuals who are working on constantly improving our practice. Well, let's have the Golden Girl speak to us for a second. Having self-determination in our classroom work is one of the greatest privileges college teachers enjoy. It's also one of the biggest impediments to effective teaching and learning because everyone at one time or another needs perspective, expertise, and insights of other people in order to keep improving. We can't see our own holes. So invite a colleague in. Invite a colleague from a different department in. Have them watch you teach and have a conversation on what they saw. You can invite us from CETL in. We would love to be able to observe your class and just talk with you about your class and teaching and what we saw. It's really important to get somebody else's view. When I was teaching in my math in my high school classroom, I changed my teaching model to a flipped classroom. So I took videos of math, I created them, and the students watched those videos at night, and then during the day in class with me, they would work on their problems. And I was stuck because I didn't feel like my students were quite getting what I was trying to get them to do in class, and there was just some things going on that I wasn't super satisfied with. So I asked my administrator, one of my principals, I said, would you come just observe my class and tell me what you think? Oh, by the way, this is how I've got it currently set up. My administrator was not a flipped classroom guru. She just knew what good teaching looked like, and she was helping me to be the best that I could. And she offered another pair of eyes to me. And so she came in, she watched me teach, she watched how class worked out, and then when it was all over, she called me to her office like the next day, and she's like, here are some ideas that I think you might consider. And none of it had anything to do with a flipped classroom. It all was about how I could manage that space that I was in. And she was seeing some things that I wasn't seeing. And I'm so grateful for her because of her, I was able to improve that classroom model, and ultimately it led to me being here. So I am thankful. Now, did you know that SelfDetermination offers a variety of things to help you with your teaching practice, to encourage you with your teaching practice, and to help you continuously improve your teaching practice? These are a few of those things. We offer educational technology tips, tricks, and ideas. We offer consultations on course design, redesign, and conversion of an existing course to an online course. We offer small group instructional feedback. We offer observations, and we offer workshops and retreats. Please use us. We are here at the university to support you on this journey of teaching and learning, and we absolutely love it. Another meme as we switch up and we move towards our final destination, but this is one made the rounds, and it was a hot one. So now let's talk about practice and the importance of practice and understanding why we need to practice, and that, hey, making mistakes, it's important, and that, hey, guess what? Teaching is hard. Practice your teaching. That's what you do. And to put it in a sports ball analogy, let's look at the Oklahoma City Thunder. They practice all the time, and they reflect on what they did wrong, and they correct inconsistencies, and they update as technology allows them to update, and thinking of the play of basketball allows them to update. Like if you watch a basketball team, if you watch the Oklahoma City Thunder today, and you watch the Boston Celtics of 1980, that's two different types of basketball. And uniforms are different, and all kinds of stuff. Like, things change. So our teaching practice needs to change. And teaching is hard. And you also need to do things with intentionality and take a risk and make a mistake on occasion. Because if you can make a mistake, one that if you come up with a lesson design and you're intentional about being innovative, and you're intentional about designing this lesson, and you're intentional about making this change, a mistake is going to occur. And if your students see that you make that mistake, and then they see you correct that mistake, and then they see you improve after that mistake is made, that's going to be powerful for them to witness, because then it gives them permission to know that they can make the occasional mistake and that they can also learn from that and improve. So we have an opportunity to model for our students about how to go through this process, and we can also model that, hey, teaching is hard, and it goes back to what we said at the very beginning of our session today. Learning is hard. So here we go. For people who care about student learning, here's the best and worst news about effective teaching that you will ever hear. No matter who you are or what you teach, you can get better with practice. Practice without awareness, without feedback, without reflection and support cannot advance knowledge or ability. And as you read that last part of this sentence, think about the Thunder. Think about a professional sports team or a college sports team that you follow. All of these things are true. And it doesn't matter what you do, we can only get better and advance our knowledge with practice, awareness, feedback, reflection, and support. So, from Wonder Woman, we are a bridge to a greater understanding. So here are the questions that I want you to consider for this particular section of practice. And these are the last questions for today. But what can you do to continue to focus on student learning? Sometimes we get caught up in, I got to get through page 75 today. And that's not the goal of teaching. The goal of teaching is to move your students through your course so that they meet those learning outcomes that you've established for them to meet. So how can we focus on that? How can we focus on the learning? And what is your plan for adapting your pedagogy as teaching and learning continues to evolve? Without that plan to adapt, you're going to have that ditto sheet ready for students who have no idea how to engage that. the scholarship and the science of teaching and learning is constantly changing. Make a plan to stay as current as you can and utilize us here at SelfDetermination to help you do that. And finally, I want to leave you with this. Don't panic. So the answer to the ultimate question of life, the universe, and everything is 42. So go back to those last questions that we were just looking at. Put all your answers down and share them with us in the discussion board. There you go. Teaching pedagogy. Geeky Pedagogy. Thank you for participating.